I want to thank IFPRI for hosting the event today and for this fourth launch of the index. We could say that this thing has been launched enough times to send it to the moon and back, I think now. But it's been great to do so because we've gotten a lot of interest and a lot of inquiries already about the index from partners all around the world. And so thank you also to all of you here today. We are really very appreciative of the interest and expressions of an interest in participating in the application of the index, not just learning more about it and hearing more about it, but actually people want to get on board and see what they can do, how they can work with us on the application of the index. So we're really appreciative of that. I can go ahead. Oh, do you have it? Okay. Well, I'll keep talking then. I was recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was at the UN Commission on the Status of Women annual meetings, which is where, thank you very much, where the first launch of this took place. And the theme of this year's CSW event was on empowering rural women. And after sitting through several days of meetings on this topic and at this event, we felt really reassured because there is such a resounding demand for something like what we've put together and something that we are focusing on with this index. And also that we came away with the conclusion, or at least I did, that there's really nothing else like this. And so it's very satisfying to know that we're filling a gap and that there is actually a large gap for something like this. And we've created a tool that has the potential to dramatically affect how we program development assistance in this area, and that we can strengthen and reshape our programs when needed based on what we find through this index and what we're able to track with this index, and that we can strengthen our project and strategy design. So that's extremely heartening. My role today is very straightforward, and it was just described. Sabina and Agnes are going to describe the more technical aspects of how the index works, but I'm going to step back and provide a little bit on the context and the background of how the index came to be, and then furthermore how it's going to be used, what its purpose is for Feed the Future, and how it will be used under the Feed the Future initiative. So I'll start with a little bit of background on Feed the Future for those of you that aren't that familiar. The Women's Index was created for the Feed the Future monitoring and evaluation framework. The Feed the Future initiative is the U.S. government's global hunger and food security initiative, and it represents a $3.5 billion pledge. We often reference the L'Aquila Pledge that President Obama made to work with partner countries and other development partners and other stakeholders to tackle the root causes of poverty and hunger. It's a whole government initiative led by USAID, but also including really important contributions and work in food security from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, USDA, State Department, Peace Corps, Department of the Treasury. Currently, Feed the Future is working in 19 focus countries where we're concentrating the majority of our efforts. And we employ a strategy that integrates agriculture and nutrition, which is one of the most important principles. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but you can see that in the slide that's up here. It's the results framework for Feed the Future. So the initiative was developed with the understanding that focusing and concentrating our resources to engage more vulnerable populations in our agricultural growth strategies would result in transformations within the local and regional economies and redistributing and reorienting the consumption, distribution, and productive patterns for more long-term sustainable development. So Feed the Future is built on an inclusive agricultural growth strategy, or an inclusive approach to agricultural sector growth. And it recognizes that healthy and sustainable development needs to incorporate and encompass all of the different groups in a society, and that means the poorest and the most vulnerable populations, of which women often comprise the majority. And so women are very central to Feed the Future. We all know that women play a critical role in agriculture, and yet despite knowing that for many, many years, they still continue to face many social and economic constraints that hinder their full engagement in the ag sector. And for those reasons, women are central to Feed the Future and the strategy, and the foundation upon which all of the missions and the USAID missions and other agencies partnering in countries have focused their efforts to be more inclusive of women and vulnerable populations. We really do believe that the empowerment of women is one of the surest bets to inclusive ag sector growth and to increasing economic growth within the countries where we're working. So for those of you familiar with Feed the Future, this is probably also very familiar to you, the now infamous Feed the Future Results Framework. I won't go into great detail, but I want to explain a few things that are helpful in understanding how the Women's Index fits in. At the bottom, we have basically how we're defining food security, which is increasing four basic components, which is availability of food, access to food, stability with access to food, and our stability and food security, and the utilization of diverse and quality nutrient-rich foods. Up above that in the flow chart, at the very top is the goal level, so overall what we're trying to achieve, which is to sustainably reduce poverty and hunger. And then the indicators are in the white box below the blue is the objective. The next level down, which is a lighter blue, is the first level objective, and where the results framework splits out into what we consider sort of the ag side and the nutrition side, because as I said before, we're integrating these two together. On your left side is inclusive agriculture sector growth, and this is where the Women's Empowerment Index comes to reside. Below that we have the green level is the project level, intermediate results that we expect to see by individual projects and what we're trying to impact. Don't try to read this all. This is just to be representative so you can see essentially where the Women's Index is factoring in and how the meaning it has within our results framework. So on that left-hand side, the second level down, which is inclusive ag sector growth, that's where the Women's Empowerment Index sits as an indicator to measure how well we are achieving inclusive ag sector growth. And for those of you really, really familiar and that have been following Feed the Future for the last year and a half or so, that used to be filled by a placeholder that was called the Gender Perceptions Index, if you remember that title, that name. When Feed the Future, the results framework was first being formed, and we were working within USAID and all of the government partners, working also with the Food for Peace office within USAID to come up with a results framework. We went through and attached indicators to all of these objectives we wanted to have, and those formulating it knew that we wanted to track something related to women, related to gender equality, and that placeholder was held. And that was there when I came into the Bureau for Food Security in November of 2010. So this is one of my first tasks in coming into the Bureau, was to make something concrete to fit in there and come up with the indicator. And so the process for doing that was the BFS, or Bureau for Food Security M&E team, started working with the gender experts throughout the agency and throughout the U.S., the other agencies that we're working with. And having brainstorming sessions about what we would want to see measured in this. And this is where we started really working closely with Karen Groen, who is the Senior Gender Advisor in the Policy Planning and Learning Bureau for USAID, and who has provided instrumental support throughout the development of the index. So I wanted to make sure that Karen got her name recognized. We had numerous meetings, and we started reviewing all of the Feed the Future strategies to see what missions and other agencies were hoping to do when they talked about gender equality or women's empowerment. And so we looked at the specific objectives they had under those themes, and we started pulling them out and trying to crunch them together into things that made sense among different dimensions. And then we also compared those against the research that had been done in the literature that was available on this particular issue of women's empowerment in agriculture. And we ended up coming up with the 5 domains that Agnes will refer to in a minute. The first 4 domains she'll talk about were very were very obvious within the strategies and the other documents we had that were being formulated. The fifth, which was time use, was really something that was more relevant within the research. But when we went back and took a look at the strategies, it was obvious that even though it wasn't explicit that time use would be affected, that in fact these strategies should be impacting time use. So with that whole process, we hammered out the 5 domains, and we went back to IFPRI that we'd had some initial conversations with about creating an index. At the same time, in a very fortuitous set of events, to make all the stars align, we were having conversations with the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative about using the multidimensional index methodology, the Alkire-Foster method, somewhere for the Feed the Future initiative. And we had a number of conversations, and just after a number of events, it became apparent that this would work really well with what we wanted to do on the Women's Index. And so we aligned essentially those two efforts or projects and came out with the really stellar index that we have now, the tool. So you can see this has been months in the making, and the end result we think is a very unique and rigorous yet practical method for tracking women's empowerment. And so for its use under the Feed the Future, we will be using it for both performance monitoring and impact evaluation for the initiative. For monitoring, in Feed the Future, I said before, we have 19 focus countries. We'll be using it to track or to monitor the change in women's empowerment with these 5 domains that occur as a direct or indirect result of Feed the Future intervention. So we'll be working at a population level within a geographic zone and tracking not just direct beneficiaries but also indirect to see overall what's happening. And the really interesting thing is that we're tracking this in surveys along with other indicators related to poverty and expenditures, and the poverty, which is we're using the under $1.25 a day, as well as food security and nutrition. So we're going to have some very healthy data sets to look at across all of these different indicators and see what's going on, doing some multivariate analysis, looking at the relationships between these different variables. And that's extremely exciting for what it will mean for our research efforts in the future. We'll also be using it for a number of rigorous impact evaluations that we're setting up. We're just forming our evaluation agenda right now, but it will be used to specifically to assess the effectiveness of certain approaches. And we've made great efforts to try to have very sound gender integration practices in a lot of our projects, but this will be used to really assess those that are working best so that we can replicate the ones that are working best and reshape those that are not working. And so both of these different uses of the tool are exciting because they provide us with different effects under our monitoring and evaluation framework. So those reasons, at the end of the day, are why we created the Women's Empowerment Index and how it fits into the overall results framework and how we intend to use it. But this tool isn't just for Feed the Future or for USAID or for the other agencies that are participating under Feed the Future. We want this to be a collaborative effort, and we want to make this useful to our development partners. And we aim to make the data and the findings from the Women's Empowerment Index widely available, and we're working right now within the Bureau for Food Security on a broader knowledge management strategy so we can make sure that we're using the best methods for dissemination and media for dissemination, and that we can get it out to people in a way that is timely and that is useful to them. But we would also, we're looking for ways to partner with other organizations so that the application of the index can be more broadly used beyond just the Feed the Future programs, and looking into other organizations such as the Rome-based agencies, the FAO, WFP, about their interest in this tool. So with that, I will digress. And I know you're looking forward really to hearing how the index works and what all it does. But before I do, I want to say some thank yous. It would be a crime not to, after all the work that's gone into that. Especially thanks to IFPRI and the team, Agnes and Ruth Meinson-Dick, Amber Peterman, and then also to Greg Seymour, who is a graduate student at American University, but also worked with a team on the data analysis throughout the process. And then to Oxford, to John Hammock and James Foster, who first came to USAID and really encouraged us to work with the multidimensional methodology that they have come up with, and then to Sabina Alkire, who's worked very closely on the development of the index, and Anna Vass, who is a graduate student at Oxford. Thank you so much for your work over the last 9 months to make this a reality.